I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Today we welcome MJ Dyer, whose debut psychological thriller, We Are Monsters, arrives on July 7th. Set against the brooding atmosphere of Bodmin Moor, the novel follows Elara, a young woman who has always lived in the shadow of her identical twin sisters. When one of them, Haley, is found dead and the death is ruled an accident, Elara refuses to accept the official story. Her search for truth becomes something more dangerous. A chance to be seen, a descent into rivalry, identity, grief, and the unsettling question of where victimhood ends and monstrosity begins. MJ Dyer joins me from the UK. It's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this.
Where did the idea for We Are Monsters come from?
So it's a funny one because at the time when I was coming up with the idea, I was in hospital a lot, recovering from brain inflammation, but it caused me to hallucinate a lot because parts of my brain were very inflamed. And I kept having this nightmare about three sisters, and I could never quite work out what was going on between them, but one of them felt a bit more left out than the other two. All of them looked identical in this nightmare. And some of my hallucinations that I'd had during hospital when my brain was inflamed had these three sisters in it too. And then I got better, I was out of hospital, didn't think anything of it until I was in a charity shop one day looking at a photo album that had all these old photos from the early 20th century. And I saw a photo where it had three identical sisters and they looked exactly like the figures that I'd been hallucinating when I had this brain illness. And I was just like, I've got to write something about that. This is a sign. And up until that point, I'd only ever written fantasy. But once I'd recovered from my brain stuff, I was like, I really want to write something really dark. I want to delve into sort of the psyche, the inner workings of people's minds. And I was like, psychological thrillers, here we come. Yeah, I didn't plan out the book. I just started writing and saw where it took me.
Character who feels adjacent to, but not fully part of, such an intense sibling bond.
Yeah, so I'm always really interested in sibling dynamics, particularly how if you have an identical twin, everyone assumes that you are part of a unit. And then I'm thinking about what happens to the third sibling, especially if it's a half sibling as well, which is the case with Elara and the two sisters. They are half siblings. So she always feels on the outside of things. She feels a bit ostracized in a way. She's on the edge, desperate to be the best friend, desperate to be another identical sister for them. And she's constantly longing to do this just to prove to herself that she has worth, because I think a lot of it comes down to her self-confidence is so low and her self-esteem is really dependent on how the twins view her. And the deeper I got into looking at this, I just found it so fascinating. I've always been really fascinated by twins as well. I know a lot of people are, and there's the whole idea that it's almost like the most eerie thing that you can get in real life. That's completely natural. Is it identical twins? It's an identical copy. It's where fascination with clones can come from as well. So I think all of that was just sort of simmering away in the back of my head whilst I was having fun exploring this, and the characters just came to me so fully formed.
Where did the title come from?
You know what? I actually can't remember. it's a weird one because with my other books, my titles change constantly, or the publisher changes it, or my agent says, let's give it a better title so it gets more attention when it's on sub. But this one, I think right from the very first paragraph I wrote on it, it was always called We Are Monsters. And a lot of it is about how monstrosity hides within plain sight and how anyone has a capacity to be monstrous. So yeah, I'm so glad that the title has stuck.
What drew you to the moors as a setting for a psychological thriller?
Sure. So I live in the southwest of England. So here we have 3 main moors. We've got Dartmoor, Exmoor and Bodmin Moor. And I live on the edge of Dartmoor, but I visited the other moors a lot. And one of the first places that I went when I came out of hospital was to Bodmin Moor. And I remember feeling like this immense sense of freedom and this almost permission to be creative again and to be myself. And that just really helped me. And then when I started writing this book, I was like, I want to set it on Bodmin Moor to capture that feeling again.
MJ Dyer is our special guest. We're talking about We Are Monsters. Her website is MJ Dyer, D-Y-E-R, mjdyrbooks.com. The reviewers of your advanced copies have described this book as dark, twisty, layered, and emotionally complex. How do you balance plot twists with emotional truth?
What a question. So I am one of the writers who never plans. I have to write and see what happens, because if I plan it first, I feel like I've already told the story and then I've just got no interest in actually writing it. So I pants my way through a first draft. And one of my big sort of things that I have to do in that is constantly put in a twist that surprises me that I don't see is coming. So when I get to the 60% mark and then the 75% mark of the word count, or what I think will be the word count, I always sit down and I say to myself, what's the most unexpected thing that could happen right now that I've not thought of? And I try and find something really wild, really out there, something that doesn't necessarily fit in with the story as it is in that form. And then in my editing and my subsequent drafts, I look at how I can make that twist seem more organic, but still surprising. So when I go back to foreshadowing, it might be adding a new subplot, completely changing a character. But it's one of the ways that I know I can surprise myself. So hopefully I can surprise readers with the twist.
Your protagonist sees the investigation as a chance to uncover the truth, but also as a chance to be fully seen. Was that dual motivation there from the beginning?
Yeah, so I think pretty much it was, because when I first started writing, I knew that I wanted Elara to be a character who's constantly striving to get attention, because she's always been in the shadow of the twins, Hallie and Astrid. And when Hallie's body is found on the moors, Elara's first reaction isn't necessarily grief, but it's, I can actually use this to my advantage because I could solve the murder and then people will know me. And unfortunately, that's not always the way it works. People tend to remember the person that's been murdered rather than the person that solved the murder investigation. But in Elara's head, she's so desperate to be noticed. So I think that dual motivation, it was really underpinning her whole character right from the start. And it's what made her such an interesting character for me to write, because she is pretty morally grey. So as a character, she is very ambiguous and she sits on the line between what is good and what is bad. And I think that was quite interesting that I chose to write her in such a deep first person perspective, because the reader gets so deep inside her head as well. And I do love reading unlikable main characters. I've heard Elara be described as an unlikable character at times, but you can understand why she is this way. She's grown up in the shadow of the twins her whole life. She's in a very powerful, rich, but matriarchal family that she's grown up in. She's constantly in the shadow of other women, and she's trying to find a way to get attention herself.
Did you know the ending as you began the book, or did it come to you along the way?
It came to me on about the 5th draft. And I remember my agent at the time was saying to me, have you sorted out the ending of this story yet? And I was like, I've got a couple of different endings and I'm not quite sure which one to go with. And then in the end, I didn't go with any of them. I invented a whole new one.
Talking about We Are Monsters, a psychological thriller from our special guest, MJ Dyer. MJDyerBooks.com is the website. What was the most difficult scene or emotional thread for you to write?
I would say that Elara's mental health throughout the story, it's very fragile, and parts of it is based on the experiences that I had when I was in hospital with brain inflammation, which caused hallucinations. And it made me realize I couldn't always trust myself with my own perception of things, because there was one day in particular, I remember I was convinced there were loads of birds flying around the hospital room where I was in, and I could feel the beating of their wings and the currents of the air against my face from it. I could see them. I could hear them. They were so real to me. But I know now that they were hallucinations. And at the time, having that realization where I was getting better, but realizing a lot of my memories were actually hallucinations and weren't real, it really instilled in me this fear that I couldn't trust myself for a long time. And when I was writing Elara's character, I gave her that aspect of my experiences. So she's trying to be really strong. She's trying to trust herself and her judgment and her intuition when it comes to solving Hallie's murder. But she's aware that she is pretty unreliable when it comes to interpreting clues. And she's aware that she does have this fragile sense of mental health, particularly with how easily she gets swept away by jealousy and envy, and how she can be quite impulsive and react first rather than thinking first and reacting later. And I found that quite a delicate thing to write for her, because I gave her some of my chronic illnesses that I have, but I didn't give her that brain inflammation illness, because I was like, if she's got brain inflammation, she's not going to be living at a university campus on the moors, is she? So she's not going to be able to be solving that. But I still tried to write from my own experiences.
Was there anything about the creation process, about this story, that surprised you?
Yeah, so it got very dark very quickly. Up until this point, I'd only been writing sort of fantasy, which did get dark at times. I might have delved into sci-fi, but this was my first attempt at writing something really psychologically dark, something that can almost be disturbing. And it surprised me how easily that came to me, to be honest. And I remember I was in a critique group and we were sharing sort of a couple of chapters each week. And one week my feedback was, I can't read yours anymore, it's giving me nightmares. And I thought, that is the perfect bit of feedback. But it really made me think my writing style has changed so much. And yeah, it got very dark.
How has it changed?
So my writing style before was more, I'm going to say, less emotional overall and more focused on plot. Whereas now it's much more character driven. I go much more deeply into sort of the inner psychological workings of a character. I have some books that I've written recently that don't really have a plot. It's more exploring characters. It's getting more literary in places. My writing itself has become a lot more poetic. And I think partly because when I had this brain inflammation when I was in hospital, I lost the ability to speak and I couldn't write. But when I did start writing, I found I was writing in poetic form, which was completely surprising for me and everyone around me because I'd never written poetry before. I was before very much of one of those writers that wants to write a sci-fi or fantasy action novel. I'd be plotting it out, writing it, really focusing on action, entertainment, adventure. And suddenly I was writing a lot of lyrical poetry. And you can see that influence now in my style. It's just stayed with me.
As authors, we deal with an awful lot of rejection along the way from our editors, from our agents, and from publishers. What have you learned about resilience during the course of your writing life?
Resilience is key. And it's one of those things that every author is going to experience. So I think once I had accepted that rejection is a part of being an author, it helps me become more resilient. And because I'm now using a pen name for MJ Dyer, which is just for my psychological thrillers, I found that it's almost given me a bit of a persona to hide behind. And I can almost think, oh, I'm not being MJ today, or I am being MJ today. So it changes how I view it. And I found that really helpful. On days where I'm just like, not feeling that great today. I don't want to think about all that and be like, I'm not MJ Dyer today, so I don't have to think about how people are reacting to this book. I can worry about that later when I step into her shoes again. But yeah, definitely have to be resilient.
We're talking with MJ Dyer about We Are Monsters, her debut as a psychological thriller writer. You have a BA in English, an MFA in creative writing, and you're pursuing a PhD in creative writing. How has formal study shaped your fiction?
That's a really great question, because so when I did my undergraduate doing my BA, that was solely English literature based. I think I did one creative writing module at one point, but I was mainly looking at classic literature. And then in my final year, I specialized in detective and Victorian fiction. And that really gave me a good understanding of the books that are already out there and the books that have really made a big impact on people across the decades. When I then started doing an MFA in creative writing, that's when my craft improved so much. And I found that I enjoyed studying a lot more when it was craft-based, practice-based, rather than read this book, write an essay about it. So I feel much more in control of language and of the words, and I feel like I know how to control it to get certain reactions out of readers better now. And my projects just excite me a bit more now as well.
Why?
Well, I feel a deeper connection to them. They feel more like books of the heart. When I look back at my earlier stuff, I feel a bit disconnected from it. And I can't say whether that's definitely because I've done a lot of the formal training now, or whether that's because that was pre-brain injury. And I am a different person now. I write differently now. And I wouldn't write one of those books that I wrote before at this point, because that's not what excites me. I don't really enjoy writing that kind of thing anymore. And I love getting really poetic and lyrical with the language in books, using that to create tension in prose, have escalating fears throughout it.
Fascinated by the process of the business behind the books that we all read. Find your agent. How did you get a publisher? Tell us that story.
Sure. So my current agent is actually my third agent. So if we go back about 10 years ago, and my debut, which is Untamed by Madeline Dyer, because that's my other writing name, that had just come out from a small press. So I got that deal myself through querying. I got an R&R at one point, that's a revise and resubmit option. Did that, but then that publisher still didn't take me on, but then another did with the revised version. So my debut came out that way. I then got a second deal with the same publisher for a sequel. And then that started getting me some agent attention. So then when I was querying, I found that I was actually getting way more full requests a lot quicker, and it seemed easier. So then I signed with an agent, and she was exclusively interested in science fiction, which was great until I had this brain injury. And then afterwards I was like, I don't really want to write a lot of sci-fi anymore. I want to write thrillers. And she didn't represent that. So we parted ways. I started querying. My second time querying agents was so much quicker, because I think it's because I was previously represented. And when I was filling out the forms, or if I just put it in the email that I'm seeking new representation, it just seemed to get me so much more agent attention. And I ended up with multiple offers there. And it was really great having that choice where I could actually choose who I wanted to represent me. So that was my second agent. She got me some deals with publishers, a lot of anthology work, because I found that I really liked editing anthologies of short stories. But then she left agenting after a couple of years. At that point, I was like, I can self-publish. I don't need an agent. I don't need a publisher. So I was like, all set to do that with all of my books from then on. And then one of my publishers, so the publisher of my most recent anthology at that point, said to me, oh, have you got any more ideas for another anthology? Because the one that I had with them had just been a finalist in the Lambda Literary Awards. So I was like, well, I could put together a proposal for you. So I spent a weekend drafting a proposal of a new anthology, sent it in, and 2 weeks later, they replied, and my editor wanted to offer me another deal. And then I realized that I had no idea what I was doing, looking at contracts, trying to do all the negotiations. It was so much legal jargon. I was just like, oh dear, I'm going to need an agent again. So I was like, third time around, let's see how this goes. I started querying again, and I found it quite nice that I could put in the subject line, offer received, I need help negotiating a contract, because I was like, oh, this is going to make me look really attractive to agents. And I did get a couple of offers. And then suddenly I got an email from another agent who I had not queried, but she said that she had heard from other agents that I was looking for new representation. And this was the agent that I ultimately ended up signing with, because she had read a lot of my other stuff. She's from a big agency in the US. And I was really excited that he reached out to me, which I know is so unusual. And I think if that had happened like today, I'll be like, oh, that's a scam for sure. Because there are scams everywhere now. But yeah, she actually reached out to me, and then she offered to negotiate the contract, and then didn't take a commission from that one either, because she was like, you got the deal yourself, I'll take them on in the future, but this one's yours. And yeah, she's great. So I'm still with her several years later.
Why do you write?
I write because it's who I am. It's how I process my feelings, my experiences, my emotions. And it's how I understand the world around me. If I don't write, I feel like I'm not fully processing everything. And I feel like it does negatively affect my well-being if I go like a week or 2 weeks without writing, or at least without thinking creatively. So it's very much a part of who I am. And it's not a choice being a writer. It's just me.
Author MJ Dyer is our special guest joining us from the UK. What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with We Are Monsters?
Ooh, that is a good question. So one of the things that I really wanted to do when writing this book was write about a powerful family and really showcase the effects of what pressure does to a person. Particularly if you're growing up in a household or an environment where there's constantly high pressure, you constantly need to make yourself be noticed. And if people can understand and relate to that, then I'm going to be really happy, because I feel that this is something that's not talked about enough, especially with people that might have a lot of siblings, or a sibling that's done something really important or really exciting, and then they're always compared to them. So I think if readers can relate to Elara in any way, I will feel really happy. But also, there is this darkness, and I want readers to almost feel a bit disturbed, a bit haunted as we go through the story. So recently, an ARC reader said to me, I felt like I'd had a bad dream and I'd just woken up upon finishing your book. And I was like, that is perfect.
What question haven't I asked you that you wish that I had?
Ooh, I can talk about what is happening after this book. So I have a new thriller that is also announced, which is called Toxic Girls, and that will release in November. That is my second psychological thriller, and it's a dual point of view with 2 different timelines. Really stretching myself there.
Were you writing both of those books at the same time?
No, so Toxic Girls, I wrote that one last year, first draft of it. It just flowed out of me. And the strange thing with that one is I wrote the whole first draft by hand, which I never normally do. But it seemed to activate a different part of my brain, a different part of my creativity. And I just could not stop writing. And my hand was cramping so much by the end of each writing session, because I was just like, I can't write fast enough. And my handwriting is also shocking.
We Are Monsters debuts on July 7th, and in November, we get Toxic Girls from our special guest, MJ Dyer. You can find her online at MJ Dyer, MJDYER books.com. MJ, this is great. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you. You have some really thoughtful and inciting questions. So that was brilliant.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.